Let's bring Leland Vittert in with that and more, host of On Balance. And Leland also, before coming to NewsNation, was a Jerusalem-based correspondent for a number of years. So certainly you have a lot of experience in this region. I think I would just start there, big picture, and what kind of viewers in the U.S. should be thinking about as they look at all of this. We've had a number of stories, firsthand stories on our program today, but for someone like you who's covered the region for some time, what perspective would you say U.S. viewers should keep in mind as they look at the news come in the last few days?
It's impossible in America to think about having mortal enemies who want to kill you, who are willing to kidnap women and children and then threaten to execute them, that live 40 miles away. Connel, you're in Manhattan, so that's Manhattan to Trenton. If you're in Dallas, that's Fort Worth. That's the geography that we're dealing with. And I think as Americans, it's very difficult, especially now that we've gotten a long way from 9/11, to think about having 25,000 people inside of Gaza, for example, 40 miles away, who want nothing more than to kill you and are willing to trade their life to do it. And that is what Israel lives with every day. It was often quoted that if you took away all of the Palestinians' guns, you'd have peace. And if you took away all the Israelis' guns, Israel would cease to exist. So that's what the Israelis are up against. When we listened to Benjamin Netanyahu a couple of hours ago, he made it clear that Israel views this as an existential fight, much the way they did in 1973 when there was the surprise invasion by Egypt and Syria that almost overran the country. So I think when you started, Connell, you said, if this turns into something larger, a regional kind of conflict, I don't want to be too alarmist, but I'd almost be surprised if it didn't.
If it didn't, right. Yeah, no, I don't think it's too alarmist. I mean, we've already seen it with Lebanon today, and, there's all this talk about Iran and what happens there. I do want to get a piece of news on today. You see it at the bottom, or right now, I should say. You see it at the bottom of your screen while Leland and I are speaking, that there are now at least 11 Americans killed. The number was 9 when we came on the air for our broadcast. The statement's just been put out by the president. Sadly, we know he says that at least 11 American citizens among those killed, many of whom made a second home in Israel, calls it heart-wrenching as part of a larger statement. It brings up a lot of issues, and one of them is the Israeli response now, Leland, is as expected and as almost anyone would tell you is warranted, has been very, very aggressive. But they are dealing with the situation where they have hostages that have been taken. So there was some question brought up earlier in our show about whether that would affect how they respond. And I would say that so far, it doesn't appear to be having an effect. But what would you say about that? I mean, the Israeli strikes into Gaza tonight with the hostages being held.
Look, I was there during the Gilad Shalit case, which was an Israeli soldier that had been kidnapped and held in Gaza. Israel traded 1,000 prisoners for one for Gilad Shalit. The flip side to that now that you have 100+ hostages is that Israel can't afford to not destroy Hamas. And I think what you heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu was a resolve to destroy Hamas. And last night I had on a spokesperson for the IDF, and ordinarily the very first thing the Israelis talk about is hostages and is bringing their people back alive. And he said, I can make no promises, and effectively, in so many words, that I can give no hope. The Israelis view right now the way to have any hope of getting their people home is by destroying Hamas. And I think perhaps Hamas, we're seeing, might be thinking that they awoken a sleeping bear here. And we've seen this before. It happened in 1973 with Israel. And I think now they are realizing how isolated they are. The one thing that I think is interesting in Israelis that I've talked to are pretty upset about this, and I just looked at President Biden's statement briefly, so forgive me if I missed a line, but there was nothing in there about holding Iran responsible or the United States standing with Israel and tracking down the people responsible, not just the people who went in to Israel and kidnap these people, but the people who fund them, the people who give them safe haven, like the Qataris, the people who train them, like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the people who supply them. That was missing from this statement. And I think that part, I think, is going to become a problem for the White House. You've got Americans now held in a faraway land.
Right.
And that is going to be something that this White House is going to have to deal with, because I think, Connell, you rightly pointed out, this story is only going to get bigger and the implications of it only are going to get more profound.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was glancing down as well as while you were talking. We just got this statement a few minutes ago from the White House, and it's 4 or 5 paragraphs. So, I don't see anything about the response either. I see more of a focus on the American citizens. In fact, the president says, quoting, "The safety of American citizens, whether home abroad, is my top priority as president." Talks about the fact that there's going to be extra consular assistance and that there's commercial flights and ground options still available, which, is debatable as well. I know it's been tough to get in and out and get a flight from Israel, but that was where the focus was. You're right. I don't see anything either about the response. But final thing here.
Yeah, look, the safety of American citizens is only as good as the threat against evil people who would threaten the safety of American citizens. And you said I lived in the Middle East for 4 years, and what it taught me is this is a cruel world, and that there are very evil people. And without the credible threat of violence, and I think Netanyahu talked about this a little bit today, and he said, and there's some reporting about his call with President Biden, that deterrence must once again become a something that the bad people in the world think about. That deterrence of action must happen. And I think there's a lot of people in the world who have wondered whether Israel would respond. They are responding that aggressively, and there's going to be a lot of people in the world watching whether the United States responds in statements like the one we saw.
A lot of people will be.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.